You can picture soils as being the skin of the earth. Soils form this very thin outer layer of our planet, where important chemical and biochemical reactions take place. And these reactions are essentially the basis for our existence as humans on Earth. My name is Marie Spohn. I'm a professor in biogeochemistry of forest soils. I study element cycling in terrestrial ecosystems, and I'm especially interested in the carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus cycles. Many processes of these element cycles occur in soils, and the aim of my research is to understand how the different element cycles interact through processes in soils. So in my group we study these different processes, and for this purpose we use different approaches. We use lab experiments, and we also conduct field experiments, and we use soil inventories. We use a large set of different techniques, such as soil chemical analysis and microbiological tools, and also stable and non-stable isotopes. When we look at soils and ecosystems, we look at complex systems, and they might occur chaotic or even random to us. And discovering order in something that might appear chaotic or random at first sight is something that I find extremely motivating. Currently, humans change this planet at an unprecedented speed. We strongly alter the cycles of elements, and every day we destroy large areas of soils that have formed in thousands of years. To me, this is a motivation to better understand soils and ecosystems, and also how we as humans affect them.
Welcome, Marie Spohn.
Thank you very much.
You are now a professor of biochemistry of forest soils. What do biochemists do?
Yeah, so biogeochemists study the natural environment, and specifically we study chemical reactions in the natural environment. And many of these reactions, they are driven and catalyzed by biota, such as microorganisms and also plants. So that's why we have the bio in the word. And then there's the geo, and this is because these chemical reactions are also largely affected by geochemical entities or geochemistry in general.
Okay. Why is it important to understand element cycling in ecosystems?
Yeah, I think it is very important to understand this, especially these days, because we as humans have very strongly affected the element cycles. For example, we have moved a lot of carbon from fossil reservoirs to the atmosphere. We have moved nitrogen from the atmosphere to cropland soils and also to aquatic ecosystems. And we have moved phosphorus from rock phosphate or rock phosphorus that has been used for a fertilizer and is now found in cropland soils and also in aquatic ecosystems. And since we have affected these element cycles so much, I think it's important to better understand the consequences of our actions.
And what would you say is the fascination of biochemistry?
Well, I think in biogeochemistry we deal with complex systems, and this is very interesting. So it is very difficult actually to predict how these systems react to, for example, global change factors such as warming or high nitrogen input. And that's what makes it so interesting, yeah.
And how did you get into it?
Me personally, well, I studied biology, I majored in microbiology, and I always enjoyed a lot studying living systems that change over time. And after my studies, I wanted to look at larger systems, and this is what brought me then to soil science and also to biogeochemistry.
Let's listen to your lecture.
Yeah.
Please enter the stage, Marie.
Thank you.
And I would like to introduce Marie Spohn, professor of biogeochemistry of forest soils, talking about element cycling in terrestrial ecosystems. Please, Marie.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to give this lecture here today. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank the people that helped to bring me here to SLU. So today I'm going to talk about element cycling in terrestrial ecosystems. In terrestrial ecosystems, chemical elements such as carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus are cycled between the plants and the soil. And I am particularly interested in the interactions between these element cycles that mostly happen in soil. So let's have a look here at some different terrestrial ecosystems. So here you can see some examples. We can see we have a huge diversity of different soils. And the first 4 examples show soils and ecosystems that we can typically find here in Scandinavia. On the right hand, you see 2 examples of soils and ecosystems that we can typically find under tropical climate. And in the second line, in the center, you see 2 examples that we typically can observe under arid climate. So you see we have a huge diversity. And despite the fact that these ecosystems and soils look so different, they have one thing in common, and this is that here elements are cycled between the vegetation, the plants, and the soil. I am most interested in the cycles of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. So let's have a look at these 3 element cycles, and starting here with the carbon cycle. So carbon dioxide is fixed by plants. They use it to build up biomass. They produce organic carbon compounds. And these organic carbon compounds, they enter the soil in the form of plant detritus, for example, senesced leaves, or in the form of root exudates. And these root exudates, this is basically dissolved organic carbon. And these root exudates are very important because they fuel and stimulate microbial activity in soil. And then organic carbon compounds are mineralized. This leads to the production of carbon dioxide, which then goes to the atmosphere, and this closes the cycle here. Now the next cycle here is the nitrogen cycle. You can already see it's more complex. We have different inputs, different forms of nitrogen in soil, and also different outputs. What I would like to highlight here is that we have 2 important inputs. We have nitrogen fixation. That means that there are bacteria in soil that fix nitrogen from the atmosphere. And there's also something called atmospheric nitrogen deposition, which is the input of reactive nitrogen to terrestrial ecosystems. And then finally, there's the phosphorus cycle. It looks less complex at first sight. So here we have rock, and when this rock weathers, phosphate is released. And this phosphate can be taken up by plants. And the plants use it for producing organic phosphorus compounds, such as, for example, DNA or phospholipids. And these organic phosphorus compounds, they enter the soil in the form, for example, of leaf litter. And in soil then, organic phosphorus is transformed from organic phosphorus into inorganic phosphorus. And this closes the cycle because the inorganic phosphorus then can be taken up again by the plants. So this is a very brief summary of the 3 element cycles, and this would be the typical way in which they are presented in textbooks. So you can see them neatly separated, one next to the other. However, if we now look at real ecosystems, things are more complex. And here we have interactions between the cycles of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. And many of these interactions take place in soil. And the interactions largely stem from the fact that many reactions of the nitrogen cycle depend on phosphorus, and vice versa, processes of the phosphorus cycle depend on nitrogen. So I'm specifically interested in these interactions, and today in this lecture I would like to give you 3 examples of my work in which we looked at these interactions. So many of these interactions between the element cycles actually take place in the rhizosphere. The rhizosphere is this interface between the plant root and the soil. And here organic carbon is released by the plant. It can be directly released into the soil, where it can be used by bacteria, or it can be given to fungal partners that form a symbiosis with the plant. In both cases, the organic carbon that comes from the plant stimulates microbial activity. And the microbes, in their turn, catalyze and drive many important biogeochemical reactions. And these reactions are essentially fueled by the organic carbon coming from the plant. And one of these reactions is the mineralization of organic phosphorus. So this means that organic phosphorus is transformed into inorganic phosphorus. And this is a process that in soil is catalyzed by exoenzymes. So these are enzymes that are released by plants and by microorganisms. And what these exoenzymes do is they speed up the process of organic phosphorus mineralization. Now, this is important because only the inorganic phosphorus can be taken up by the plants. The organic phosphorus is not available for plant uptake. So this then shows a very interesting interaction between the carbon cycle and the phosphorus cycle. And this is an interaction that I'm very interested in. And among other things, we try to visualize this. So we conducted a mesocosm experiments with 4 plants. And here we labeled the carbon dioxide that the plants take up using radiocarbon, which is a radioactive carbon isotope. And then we can track the carbon. We can see how the carbon is taken up by the leaves, how it is transported down the shoot into the root, and finally how it is released into the soil. This you can see in the first line of these 4 images for 4 different plants. The red color shows us there's carbon going into the root. The green color shows us there's carbon also being released into the soil. And concurrently, we measured the activity of these phosphatases, which again are these exoenzymes that catalyze organic phosphorus mineralization. And what you can see here is that along the root, we have a high phosphatase activity. And this was measured using a technique which I developed as a young postdoc, which is called solzimography. So this shows us that we have here areas where carbon is released, and in the same areas we see a high phosphatase activity, and this comes largely from the microbes. So this shows quite nicely this interaction between the carbon cycle and the phosphorus cycle. Now you might ask, so why is it actually important to understand these interactions between the element cycles? And one reason why it is so important is that currently, as humans, we strongly change single reactions of the element cycles. For example, we strongly increase the amount of nitrogen that enters terrestrial ecosystems in reactive form. So we have increased nitrogen deposition in many parts of the world. And this can also be seen here in the second figure. So we see that over the last decades, we had a strong increase in the global anthropogenic nitrogen input to the biosphere. And a part of that is direct fertilizer application, but a part of that is also this atmospheric nitrogen deposition. So even ecosystems that to us look quite natural, they might receive quite high nitrogen inputs in many parts of the world. And for me, the interesting question here is, how do these high nitrogen inputs affect processes of other element cycles? And this is something that I studied quite intensively with my group during the last couple of years. And there's the hypothesis that when we have these high nitrogen inputs, that ecosystems shift from being nitrogen limited to being phosphorus limited, because the nitrogen demand of the plants is saturated by the nitrogen coming from the atmosphere. So this is an interesting hypothesis, and we wanted to look further at this. And for this purpose, I, together with my group, studied many long-term nitrogen addition experiments in many parts of the world. Some of them located in grasslands and some of them located in forests. And here I would like to show you an example. So we studied the longest running nitrogen addition experiments in temperate forests. You can see them here on the map. 2 of the experiments are located at the east coast of the United States, and 2 of the experiments are located here in Scandinavia. And these experiments allow us to understand how these ecosystems react to these high nitrogen inputs. So at these sites, we have always plots that don't receive additional nitrogen. These are the control plots. And then we have plots that receive increased amounts of nitrogen. And the experiments at the time that we studied them, they were 26 years old. And I'm only going to show you here one result. So we looked at different properties or different reactions and different parameters associated with the cycling of phosphorus. And what I'm showing you here is the phosphorus stock in the organic layer. So you can see the 4 sites, and then you always see the control and then the nitrogen addition treatment. you also notice at Harvard Forest, we have actually 3 of these boxes. This is because here we have 2 nitrogen addition treatments. Now, what we found was that at the 2 North American sites, we have a significant decrease in the phosphorus stock of the organic layer in these forest soils. In contrast, at the 2 Scandinavian sites, we see no significant change. So this indicates first that these different ecosystems react differently to these high chronic nitrogen inputs. And secondly, we see that we have these decreases of the phosphorus stock at the North American sites, indicating that the plants here take up more phosphorus. So this is an indication that there is maybe some truth in this hypothesis that the phosphorus demand is increased when we have these high chronic nitrogen inputs. And this is something that we need to look at further during the next year to see if we find further evidence that high chronic nitrogen inputs shifts ecosystems from being predominantly nitrogen limited to being phosphorus limited. Yeah, this was the second experiment. I'm now coming to the third and last experiment or example of my work, sorry. So this is about soil organic carbon storage. And this is a topic that has been very strongly debated over the last decades. So here the idea is that we can remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere by storing more organic carbon in the soil. And this could work if we, for example, have increased inputs of organic carbon to the soil or decreased outputs of carbon dioxide. Now, the interesting question for me here is how does it affect, or how do these high organic carbon stocks in the soil and the increase in the organic carbon stock affect the cycling of nitrogen and phosphorus? And we know that if you have increased amounts of organic carbon in soil, we also have increased amounts of nitrogen and phosphorus, organic nitrogen and organic phosphorus. And this is because soil organic matter does not only consist of carbon, but also of nitrogen and phosphorus. So I wanted to know more, how much phosphorus do we actually need to increase the amount of carbon in soil? So I conducted a literature study and I looked at the carbon to phosphorus ratio in different pools of the ecosystems. So the main conclusion of the study is that if we want to increase the organic carbon stock that is sequestered in soils, we will also need to sequester or to store large amounts of phosphorus. And this is something that we should think about carefully, because if this phosphorus is locked up or sequestered in soil, it cannot be at the same time be in the plant. But let's have a quick look here at the details. At this table, I'm starting from the bottom line. There you can see the mineral-associated soil organic matter. So this is soil organic matter that is attached to mineral surfaces. And this makes the organic matter stay for a long period of time in soil. This is beneficial if you think about removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. However, what this study here shows now is that this mineral-associated soil organic matter is also very rich in phosphorus. And this means that if we increase the amount of carbon that is stored in this pool, we will need quite a bit of phosphorus, and we will lock this phosphorus up in the soil. Then we can go to the next line. In the table, organic matter in mineral topsoils, you can see we have still quite low C2P ratios, so we need quite a bit of phosphorus for increasing here the amount of carbon that is stored in the pool. Then we can go further up, organic layer of forest soils. Here the C2P ratios already get a little larger. And then we have organic soils, such as peatlands. Here we have quite large C2P ratios, which indicates that here we can potentially increase the amount of carbon that we store in this pool without a large footprint or large effect on the phosphorus cycle. So we would not need a lot of phosphorus for increasing the amount of carbon stored here. And finally, there's wood, where it has these very large C2P ratios, which indicate that potentially we can store a lot of carbon in wood without locking up a lot of phosphorus. So this shows us that if we want to increase the amount of organic carbon in the soil, we will need quite a bit of phosphorus. And there might be different pools in terrestrial ecosystems that are more beneficial for carbon storage, because here we would not need so much phosphorus. And I showed this calculation here for the phosphorus, but you can of course make a very similar calculation also for the nitrogen. And I think it is important to take this into account if we discuss soil organic carbon sequestration, because it shows us that if we want to increase the organic carbon in the soil, this has an effect on the cycling of nutrients, and this would lock up quite a bit of phosphorus, for example, in the soils. With this, I'm already coming to the end of this short lecture. I hope that I could convince you that interactions of the cycles of carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus are important. I'm very glad that I have the opportunity to study this further during the next years at SLU, and I would like to thank you very much for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Marie, and welcome back to your seat here. And don't forget to email your questions to Marie, nyaprofessorer@slu.se. Thank you.
Thanks.
I just need to ask, what would happen? What could be the consequences to the trees, for example, if phosphorus becomes limiting for the ecosystems?
Yeah, I mean, we know that in many terrestrial ecosystems, phosphorus is limiting. Here in the temperate zone and in the boreal zone, phosphorus is at the moment not critical. But of course, it's an interesting question how these high chronic nitrogen inputs affect this balance, and whether we can see already indications that the ecosystems shift from being predominantly nitrogen limited to maybe nitrogen and phosphorus co-limited. Yeah.
Okay. In your lecture, you showed an example of work that was based on long-term field experiments. Why are those long-term experiments important for your work?
Yeah, so they are very important for my work because we try to answer questions how ecosystems react on the long run, on the long term. And for this, we need field experiments, and we need them to be monitored over a long period of time. So if, for example, today we ask questions about how ecosystems react to global change, to climate change, then we need to monitor ecosystems over a long period of time. We cannot answer these questions just by looking at a forest maybe for 2 years or so.
And you told me before, when we prepared for this session, you told me that you also participated in a global research network. Could you tell us something more about that?
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to participate in a global network, which is called the Nutrient Network. So this is a network of grassland sites at which the same experiment is conducted. And these sites are located all over the world. So it's basically scientists that have a grassland site at their university or at a field station, and there they conduct the same experiment. And then all the data from the experiments goes to a central database. And this allows us to understand how different grassland ecosystems in different parts of the world react to the same change, for example, in the availability of nitrogen or in the availability of phosphorus.
And what does it give you personally to take part of such a network?
Well, it's been a very great experience because you meet people from all over the world that are interested in the same question as you or in similar questions. And it's been really a pleasure to work with these people and discuss together, maybe also from slightly different perspectives, how these ecosystems react to changes.
Thank you. Well, we have got a few questions here, or quite a lot of questions, I would say. Are there any other anthropogenically widespread compounds that affect the cycling of nitrogen, carbon, and phosphorus?
Widespread compounds?
Are there any other anthropogenically widespread compounds that affect the cycling of nitrogen, carbon, and phosphorus?
Yeah, I mean, this is maybe not central to my research, but of course there are many compounds that affect the cycling. We have a lot of pollutants. Many ecosystems suffer from pollution, and I'm not meaning here the pollution of nitrogen. There are also other pollutions. Then at the moment there's of course a big discussion about microplastic. What does microplastic actually do to our environment? We hardly know.
Yeah. I take the next one. Nitrogen deposition have so far been rather low in Sweden compared to other parts of Europe. If nitrogen deposition would increase to a much higher level, what would be the main effects on forests in Sweden? And will soil type change?
Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, we see that in Sweden we mostly have high nitrogen deposition, of course, in the south and not so much in the north. And yeah, this is a question I'm really interested in. What happens if we have these high nitrogen inputs? You saw that in the lecture. At the North American sites, we see that there's increased demand by the vegetation. So maybe I can explain some more things about the study. So in the study, we also looked at other parameters. For example, we see that this phosphatase activity is upregulated in all these soils, indicating that there is a larger demand for phosphorus by the vegetation, very likely. And then we see that the ecosystems react differently. So at the North American sites, we actually see that there's a higher uptake by the plant. And this can be hypothesized also to happen here in Sweden if we would have very high nitrogen inputs, that then the next limiting macronutrient would be phosphorus, and that phosphorus would be potentially become scarce, maybe not limiting, but scarce for primary production. Yeah.
And I'm not sure if you answered the question, will soil type change?
Well, the soil type. The soil type or the soil area doesn't change, but many soil properties might change, yeah.
Okay.
For example, the nitrogen to phosphorus ratio of the organic layer might change very strongly, yeah.
Another question now from the audience. Carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus are common elements and essential for trees and other plants. Could there be an element hitherto overlooked that although far less... Sorry, I need to read this again. Could there be an element hitherto overlooked that although far less common could be essential for the interaction between the big three, carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. It's difficult to answer. I mean, during the last years, I've been very strongly focusing on carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus. I'm also increasingly interested in silicon. There are interesting results coming out about manganese, but one would have to study this with more detail to really be able to answer this question. Yeah.
Okay, there is a lot of work to do, Marie.
Yeah.
The data you showed for 2 sites in the US and 2 in Scandinavia, can they indicate that the forest in the US is nitrogen limited and the forest in Scandinavia is not?
I would say that both forests, and here I'm talking here about the plants, are predominantly nitrogen limited. But I think we have to abandon the idea that only one element at a time can be limiting. I mean, this is a very old concept that we still find in the textbooks, but it can of course be that more than one element limits at a time. And I would say they are both mostly dominated by nitrogen, but we see that they react differently when we change the inputs of nitrogen and phosphorus and their ratio, yeah.
Thank you for your questions. Keep asking questions to our professors, please. Well, we were speaking about long-term experiments, and SLU also have long-term experiments. Could you tell us something about them and what they mean to your research?
Yeah, SLU actually has a lot of field experiments and also many monitoring sites and inventories. And they're extremely important. I think SLU can really be very proud of these long-time data series because they're extremely important if we want to answer now questions about global change. As I said before, we cannot answer these questions by looking at a forest or at an ecosystems for just 2 years. We need long-time data series, and SLU really has many of these experiments and monitoring sites and inventories, and they're extremely important, yeah.
And how long are the data series? How long term are they?
Yeah, I mean, I know that there are field experiments that have been running for 100 years.
Okay.
But we also have other inventories that don't go back so long. But of course, their value increases with time. And of course, it costs to maintain this, but it's so important to have this. And there, I think SLU really is very outstanding in the sense that we have so many experiments and long-term data sets here, yeah.
In a few years' time, perhaps 5 or 10, is there any research issue where you hope you will have a breakthrough?
Well, there are many topics where I hope to have a breakthrough. Yeah. I think, maybe I can say that one topic that is very close to my heart and where I hope to where I hope that there will be some progress is this topic also of organic phosphorus mineralization. This is something that at the moment we are not very good at measuring, and it would be important because this process is really central for element cycling. It, as I tried to explain in the lecture, it renders phosphorus available to plants, and therefore this process is also important for other cycles, for example the carbon cycle, because if this process runs at a very low rate, then it might limit primary production, and then this has an effect also on the carbon cycle. So I hope and I would wish that we see some progress concerning this topic. Yeah.
Interesting. We'll see. We have a last question from the audience. The EU is trying to be climate neutral. I've heard about initiatives to financially benefit agricultural methods designed to increase carbon stored in the agricultural soil, while the agricultural continues on said land. Follow? Yeah.
I didn't get the
no,
question.
No, the question hasn't come yet. Are you saying that such methods may actually require the addition of more phosphorus through fertilizer, so that the wish to, and now I had to show more here. Sorry, so that the wish to reduce atmospheric carbon may drive nutrient leakage into lakes, etc. Did you get the question?
I did. Understand the question. Yeah, I mean, I think we should ask and take into account how the sequestration of carbon in soil affects other element cycles. And as I explained in the lecture, when we store more carbon, we also store more organic nitrogen and more organic phosphorus. And nitrogen and phosphorus that is sequestered or locked up in the soil organic matter cannot be at the same time in the plant. So this is something that we need to take into account. If we want to store more carbon, we need more phosphorus. I mean, this is a matter of fact, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for attending the broadcast, Marie, and good luck.
Yeah, thank you very much.